Hello, welcome back. We are closing in on the end of the month here, and I have completed probably all of the books that I'm going to complete this month. So I am just going to put this video out like kind of a little bit early because the month technically ends on a Monday, but I put videos out on Fridays, so you get it now. If you're new here, this is just my monthly wrap-up that I do where I just talk about all the books that I've read in this month. I talk about the books that I plan on reading next month, and then I'll talk a little bit about channel stats, how the channel did for this past month, and a little bit of projecting or things that are going to change or what I'm planning to do in the month to come. Pretty standard stuff there. So nothing earth-shattering there. I didn't reinvent anything with this format, so we're just going to dive in. I have like 5 books here in front of me that I'm going to talk about briefly in terms of the books that I finished, or I guess I have 4 of them, the books here, and then one of them read entirely on audiobook, and I don't own the physical. So we're going to talk about 5 books when I talk about the books that I read this month. One of them, I was 75% of the way through it by the end of last month, so I just finished it this month, and that book is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, which if you follow along with the channel, you'll know that I've already put out a full review of this book. So quick thoughts on it. It was fantastic, and I can't wait to continue the series. I can't wait, but I'm gonna wait like a little bit. Like I'm excited to continue through it, but I don't know if I think I'm in a rush, and that's complicated. What I mean by that is that I want to take my time with this series. I think I was considering at one point reading one book from this series every month, and that would be like 16 months straight of reading Robin Hobb, and I thought that would be fun, and I think it probably would be fun, but I'm not structured enough for that. I'm not disciplined enough for that. I read what I want to read when I want to read it, and this series, from what I've heard and from what I read in this book so far, seems to make you feel a certain way, and I feel like I need to feel a certain way before I start reading it, because I know how I'm going to feel at the end of the book, or at least I think I know how I will typically end when I finish a book in this series. And that feeling is essentially dread. They're really good books. They're really well written. But Robin Hobb, at least in this first book, and it sounds like it just continues from here, she just abuses our main character, and I really like our main character. So it's a struggle. Like I said, there's a full review of that book on the channel, so I'll put a link to that in either the description, or I'll figure out how to put it up here above my head, and it'll be there. So check it out if you're curious. Quick version though of that review. It was really, really good, and I think you should read it if you like a character-driven, like heavily character-driven fantasy story. After finishing that book, I went in a completely different direction, and I picked up The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs by Steve Brusette. At least that's how I think you pronounce that name. I'm not really sure, but this is my first nonfiction read of the year. I had technically started it earlier in the year, and then I didn't touch it for like a month, and I was like 30 pages in by the start of this month, but my library had the audiobook available, which helped me just blaze through the rest of it. This was really, really good, really interesting. Unlike anything that I've read, I haven't read a nonfiction book, honestly, in over a year. And the last one that I did read was The Wager, which was about shipwreck and, human things. This is prehistoric information that I was getting here, and it was really well delivered. It was largely about dinosaurs, mostly about dinosaurs, and then partially about paleontology and how paleontologists do their job, and then a little bit about our author as a paleontologist and kind of the people he knows and the routes that he took and his accomplishments, the people he knows, their accomplishments, things like that. And those parts were the least interesting to me, but how paleontology works, at least that was interesting. And then the dinosaur parts were really, really cool. And not just cool, but genuinely interesting. I at least feel like I learned a lot while reading it, even though I don't know that I could really recite much information from the book, but still, it was really cool. The title is The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, and that is a really appropriate title because he really covers, everything from the rise, like the start of dinosaurs as we know it, at least, 200 something million years ago. That's where we have like our earliest fossils or our earliest discoveries are from that period. And he talks about that period for like a decent amount of the book, and then goes into the more current stuff. And he spends more time on the periods that are most recent, because those are the periods that we have most information on. But really interesting that he was able to talk at all about things that are 200 million years ago, because that's a long time ago. That's a really long time ago. Really try to conceptualize what a million is. It's sometimes I think about that and it's nuts. A million is big. 200 of those is really big. That's my smart guy comment of the day. 200 million is a big number. So, think on that. And even at the end of this book, we're talking about, the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. And even that's 56 million years ago. That's a long time ago. Smart guy fact number 2, 56 million is also really big. Not as big, but pretty big. There's a lot of talk in this book about a lot of things that I don't know about. A lot of dinosaurs I'd never heard about. A lot of things that aren't dinosaurs that, he's like, well, this is like sort of a dinosaur. It's like a pseudo dinosaur, and dinosauromorph is a term in the book, and that's cool. That's interesting. There's a lot of stuff out there that wasn't just dinosaurs, and I feel like I just kind of lump everything that was alive when I wasn't alive as like, a dinosaur. But there's a lot of stuff out there that wasn't dinosaurs. Anyway, none of this is interesting, what I'm saying. He does a much better job explaining it in this book. And he has another book, the follow-up, is called The Rise and Reign of the Mammals, which talks about, in my understanding, it talks about everything kind of after this book. So 56 million years ago and beyond. So post-dinosaur extinction and, beyond. So how did we come to be? What are the earliest mammals that, kind of survived the extinction or made it out of the extinction, and how did they evolve into what we have, all of what we have alive today? Like woolly mammoths are talked about, but I'm sure that's not where it begins, because at the end of this book, he talks about how, most of the things that survived were the little guys that could fit into the tiny cracks and hide from the elements, because the whole world was basically inhabitable for like most of the things that were alive on it for a very long time. So it should be really interesting to see, how those things that managed to survive somehow through a time period where this planet was borderline inhabitable, and how they kind of took over the world, like regained control almost of the world, like spread out and covered it again where it was mostly desolate for a very long time. Super, super interesting. Really, really well written. Again, the paleontology parts, I could take it or leave it, but the rest of it, the actual discoveries and things like that, it was really, really cool. I highly, highly recommend this one. I either have a really good track record for picking nonfiction books, or I actually like nonfiction books. I haven't figured out which is true, but in the last 2 years, I've read 2 nonfiction books, and I loved both of them. The previous one that I read that I loved was The Wager, which, if you haven't read that, check it out. Very different, but it's the only other nonfiction I've read, and I loved it. And then I read this one, and I loved it. So I really think I should just read more nonfiction books. I don't know why I don't do that, but every time I do it, I think that I should do it more, and I hope to do more of it this year. We'll see what happens. After that, I got volume 30 of One Punch Man in the mail. I pre-order these. Every time I get one, I pre-order the next one, and then when they show up, I read it just kind of immediately. They don't take long. It's 30 minutes, and you read the whole thing. Super fun. It continues to be super fun. I love this series. This whole shelf up here is all One Punch Man. It's just ridiculous, and it's getting kind of intense. Like, we're getting up to sort of, I think, like the climax, or I feel like we've been building towards this climax for a very long time, like the same kind of enemy that we're with this whole time. I mean, there's a lot of enemies, but there's the one big bad, and he keeps being there. And so I feel like at some point they gotta get that guy. So we're getting close, I think. Interesting that One Punch Man was like not at all in this. I don't think he even made it to one single page, at least of like the main storyline. I think he was in like a flashback or something, but that's it. But yeah, still really good, even without our flagship character. And that's all I'll say about that one, because I don't know how many people here are interested in me talking about comic books or manga and all that. So moving on, I read a really weird book this month. Weird in that, weird in a few ways, and I'll talk about that, because I don't know how to talk about this book without talking about how weird it is. But not my typical kind of book. It is a fantasy book, but it's not like high fantasy. There's not like magic systems and stuff like that. It's fantasy in the sense of that our characters are ghosts and living in the afterlife and all that. And this book came highly recommended to me by a friend of mine, and he loved this book, and he told me that he thinks I should check it out. I lent him a couple books, Pure Nessie and The Final Empire, and he loved Pure Nessie. He didn't love The Final Empire, and regardless, he gave me Lincoln in the Bardo and said I should check this out. This is by George Saunders. This is the first thing that I've ever written by George Saunders. He typically writes short stories, is my understanding, and this is his first full-length novel. I think it came out like 7 or 8 years ago at this point. It's not super new, but yeah, it's. I have complicated feelings about this. I think I can sum it up in that as a book, I don't like this at all. As a something written on paper and bound together, I don't like this, and I'm going to talk about that. But as a story, I really like this. So I'm conflicted. What I mean by all that is, I'll start with the negatives first, and the negatives are how this was written, and the negatives are how it was performed, because I did audio and physical book for this one. I did mostly audiobook because the physical format of it really bugged me. But then even the audiobook had issues, or it bugged me. So whatever. I let's explain why. I'll have to insert some pictures up on screen as I talk about this book, because I want to talk about mostly the formatting of the book. It's written in a way that made me feel like I was missing something. Like I didn't understand what I was reading, and I that felt strange to me. So I had to pick this up twice, because the first time I picked it up, I read I think like 30 pages or something like that, and I was like, I don't know what's happening. Not that I don't know what's happening in the story, but I don't know what's happening with the way this book was written. So I had to put it down, because I was confused. And then I found that George Saunders himself, the author of the book, has a video on YouTube, which is, I think it was like 16 minutes long or something like that. So not too long, but long enough where he explains how you read this book. And that is odd to me, but it was necessary, because I watched it and it did help. And then I went back and I read it again, and I still had issues with it, but I understood a little bit more of why, or not really why it's written, but how it's written and how it's supposed to be read. And honestly, in that video, he does explain a little bit about what is happening, or what he hopes you understand is happening. And I think that definitely helped me read the book, but I don't think I should need that. As a reader, I shouldn't need to watch the author explain to me how to read his book, because I've read hundreds of books, and this made me feel like I don't know how to read a book. The word pretentious kept popping into my head, and I've seen people now reviewing that or mentioning that in their reviews about how it's kind of pretentious the way that it's written. But I don't know if pretentious is necessarily the right word, but it's hard to explain. It's just, I don't think anybody else could have gotten this book published. I don't think if George Saunders wasn't George Saunders, and he wasn't a prolific author of a bunch of highly acclaimed short stories, and be a well-loved person and all that, I don't think anybody would have published this book. Like I said, I'm going to put examples up on the screen, but basically the structure of it, or the actual formatting of the book, is somebody will talk, or there will be words on the page, and then there will be the name of the person that said it. So you read something, and then you find out who said it, and then you read something else, and then you find out who said that. And most of the time that's fine, because most of the time it's just like a little line, but sometimes it's a big chunk. So you could potentially be reading a lot of a big paragraph, and you don't know who's saying it. And it shouldn't necessarily be that big of a deal, because you don't always need to say John said blah, and then Billy said blah, and then John said blah. But these characters didn't necessarily all have their own voice, and there's a lot of characters. Mostly there's a set group, but there's a lot of voices, I guess, or there's intended to be a lot of voices, but it feels like there's not that many. It's hard to explain. I didn't necessarily feel a visceral difference between person A and person B at all times. Some of them, the way that they said the things that they said blended in with some of the others, like our main characters at least. There were a lot of side characters who were very distinct, but they kind of came and went. And then there's our main characters who I knew who they were based off of what I was reading, but only when their physical traits were expressed. And I couldn't necessarily tell by just a one-off sentence of something that they said, unless it was something about themselves or if they were describing part of them or somebody else described a part of a person, then I know who's going to talk. But even that wasn't the biggest deal, right? Like, you read and then you find out who said it, and that's fine. That's unique, but it's fine. I can move past that. But then there was a lot of times where you get that same structure, right? So this person is talking, and then it says who they were. And then you read the next part, and that's somebody else is talking, and then it tells you who that is. But then sometimes you're reading, and it's another chunk of text and whatever, but you know that this is going to be from a person. But then that person will say, Roger said this, and then Henry said that, and so it's almost like you're now getting a normal structure, but within this strange structure. Again, it's hard to explain this without showing you or maybe reading it to you, so I'm going to try that. This is, by the way, an entire chapter of the book, which is a separate issue because the chapters don't even feel like scenes necessarily at all times. It feels like one scene broken up at random at various points in this book, which is another issue in and of itself. They used Roman numerals for the chapter titles. So the chapter title is XLIII, so 43, right? I can read Roman numerals, but that's unnecessary. That's, I think, by definition, pretentious. So anyway, I'm going to read this chapter to you. It doesn't spoil anything because you won't know what I'm talking about, but I'm just going to read it to you as it's written. We found the gentleman as had been described to us, near Bellingweather, husband, father, shipwright. Hans Volman. That part means Hans Volman has just said what we just read, right? So then it says, sitting cross-legged and defeated in a patch of tall grass. Roger Bevins III. So that's a different person kind of interjected almost mid-sentence, right? Like just added on to the sentence that we just read previously by Hans Volman. As we approached, he lifted head from hands and heaved a great sigh. He might have been, in that moment, a sculpture on the theme of loss. Hans Volman. So again, we're back in the voice of Hans Volman. Shall we? Mr. Volman said. I hesitated. The Reverend would not approve, I said. The Reverend is not here, he said. Roger Bevins III. You see what I mean? We're back in the perspective of Roger Bevins, but we have him saying that Mr. Volman said something, and then I replied with this, and then Mr. Volman replied again with this. But why didn't Hans Volman's last paragraph end in shall we? And then why didn't Roger Bevins's start with I hesitated, the Reverend would not approve? And then why didn't we go back to Hans Volman where he could then conclude with the Reverend is not here? It's things like that. And I don't know if that's helpful, the way that I just read that in this disjointed way where I kind of tried to explain how I was reading it, but that's how it's written. It's just odd. And when choices like that are made, I feel like there has to be a reason for them. Otherwise, they are just complex or confusing. I mean, it's not confusing. It's not difficult to understand, but it doesn't make any sense. There's no reason for this to have been written like that. It doesn't accomplish anything. And there's nothing, you can't boil that down and explain to me that, oh, this was written like that to elicit something else or something like that. There's none of that. There's no, by the end of the book, I have no more clarity on why it was written like that than I did at the beginning of the book, which makes me think that there is no reason for it. It was just a choice George Saunders made, and he has every right to do that. I'm not criticizing him exercising that right, but I am saying that I don't agree with him making that choice. I don't even mind the interjecting, right? Like I commented how at the beginning something Rogers said almost could have been added onto a sentence that Hans Volman said, and that's fine. That's fun. I like that. There's several instances of that throughout the book where it's almost like a stream of consciousness type of writing or stream of consciousness type of speaking. Like the characters, it almost feels like they're sharing a consciousness and they know what each other is saying before they're going to say it. Like they're sharing thoughts somehow, and maybe that's intended. That I could get behind that. There's several examples of that, of people kind of talking on top of each other and cutting each other off and finishing each other's sentences, and that I like. That's fun, but that's not so much formatting. The formatting of that even is annoying, but I like the concept. I like the way that the dialogue is delivered in those instances. I have another example of that, and I'll read this without naming the characters between each dialogue shift. Smiling, grateful, gazing about themselves in wonder, favoring us with a last fond look as they surrendered, succumbed, capitulated. And that last surrendered, succumbed, capitulated is where we're going back and forth between Hans and Roger. And that's fine. I like that. That's cool. They're working with each other to convey a story to you, the reader. And so that's mostly what I mean by I don't like this as a book. I don't like the way that it was written. And then, like I said, I did a lot of this in audiobook, and the audiobook had its own problems. In the audiobook, they don't actually read the names because they're voiced by different people. So that helps a little bit with the comprehension, because even if the characters don't have their own distinct voice in the writing, the narrators, the voice actors, do have their own literal voices. So that helps you kind of keep the characters straight, right? And so that's great. That was a big help when I was listening to this. I could still understand the story, and it didn't have to be broken up with Hans and Roger and all the other names. But like I said, there's a lot of characters, or, there's a few main characters, and then there's a ton of side characters, and then below, like characters that are just, they say one thing, or it's an excerpt from somebody's book that's mentioned, right? And then it's cited. And so there's a lot of names dropped throughout the book, and that led to this audiobook being read by 167 voice actors. That's too many. That's just too many. And the cast was selected in a way that I don't really approve of either, because most of them are not voice actors. And there's a difference between acting and voice acting, I think. And a lot of the narrators are actors and not voice actors, and it showed. And a lot of them are not even that. A lot of them are just, George Saunders narrates some of this, and his mother and his father, they narrate some of this, and that's like fun and cool and good for you, George Saunders. You are famous and you get to do this, but it's a really dry performance when they're not actors. And so you get a lot of what just sounds like you're back in middle school and somebody's reading their paper aloud in the front of the class. It's dry, it's emotionless. It's probably how I sounded when I read those two examples to you, because I'm not a voice actor. So they shouldn't hire me to read this audiobook. And they didn't. And that's a good choice. They shouldn't have done that. But they did choose like 160 people who similarly aren't capable of this, or not equipped for this, and even if it's just one line and it's essentially a throwaway line, I'm still here and I'm still listening to this audiobook and I still want the performance. And so it took me way out of the story when a line was delivered poorly with no emotion and nothing behind it, and it was literally just a person reading words off of a page, and that was distracting. Similarly with some of the other characters who were narrated by people who are famous, and it felt like they were just chosen because they were famous. And so, maybe they gave it effort, right? Nick Offerman does a great job. He's one of the main characters. He was great. He's, I don't know, maybe it's just because I like Nick Offerman, but whatever. But every time he was talking, though, I just pictured Nick Offerman. Okay, my camera died hours ago, and I just finally, I charged it, and I got back down here. So lighting's different and all that, but we're back. I think what I was saying was that I found it distracting that the narrators in the book were either someone who shouldn't be narrating an audiobook, or someone famous who I could recognize the voice of, and that was distracting for a different reason. Maybe they were a talented voice actor. That's possible. Like Bill Hader is in this, and he's great. He puts on his voice, but he still sounds like Bill Hader. So every time he was talking, I'm just picturing Bill Hader, and I was picturing him doing a skit, and it just didn't feel, I don't know, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like he was chosen because he maybe auditioned for the role and then he did it. It felt like he was chosen because maybe he's had a conversation with George Saunders in the past, and George was like, you get to be this guy. And unfortunately, I felt one of those two ways about pretty much every narrator in the audiobook. And again, I think there are legitimately 167 narrators in this audiobook. Now, all of that being said, and all of that being true, and how I legitimately felt about this book when I was reading it, it also has to be said that I really enjoyed this. I really liked this. As a story, it's really good. And the writing, if you remove the format, was really good, which isn't a surprise probably to most people if you've read George Saunders. Again, I haven't read George Saunders before, but he is a huge name in writing in general. And I immediately understood why that is. Again, seeing past the format, the words that he weaves together are really great. Like they made me think a lot. I don't know if you noticed, I have quite a few little tabs in this book. I am not someone who annotates. I'm not someone who tabs books ever, really. Not never. It's very rare. I want to do it more, but I don't know. I don't always feel compelled to do it. But when reading this, I felt compelled many times to do it. Specifically, I keep thinking back to this one part of the book, this one, it's like at the end of one of the chapters. It's a small little paragraph, but it's stuck with me, and it's still with me, and I'm still thinking about it, just because I think it's so well put. It's not, I don't think this really counts as a spoiler. I'm going to read directly from the text pretty much, so maybe skip ahead a little bit. Maybe I'll try to put the timestamp on, but I'm going to read directly from the text now. Basically, to set the scene, we have two characters, our main two characters, and they're trying to make a decision. Well, sort of. They're essentially, one of them wants to do something, and the other one is more on the side of like, no, we can't do that. I don't think it'll work. And that first character's response to that, to that other character saying, I don't think that'll work, so we can't do it, I just think it's so well put. Friend, we are here, already here, within. A train approaches a wall at a fatal rate of speed. You hold a switch in your hand that accomplishes you know not what. Do you throw it? Disaster is otherwise assured. It costs you nothing. Why not try? I love that. That's so good. It gave me chills. Again, just there. It gave me chills the first time I read it. It's so good. It's simple, right? It's slightly reminiscent of, the classic trolley problem, right? Just because it is a train and there's a lever, but it's the simplicity of it, where it's just like, you're just standing there, you're seeing something about to happen, you see a thing that you can do, you don't know if it'll work, but why not? It just really made me think about, I don't know, how many times are you just watching something happen and you feel like you don't know how to help, so you just don't help, right? You don't know what to do about this situation, so I'm not going to do anything about this situation because I can't do anything about this situation. I'm completely helpless to whatever this thing is. But a lot of the times you can, or at least you can try. You don't have to know if something will work, but you can try, and either the situation will just commence as it was going to before and disaster will occur, or maybe you can make a difference. And that's just really, really well put, I thought. I think he did a great job with that. And there are a lot of other lines in this book that just really just made me think. They made me think about a lot of things too, not about different people in different situations, different walks of life than me, right? I mean, this book takes place a long time ago. Lincoln in the Bardo, right? That Lincoln is referring to Abraham Lincoln, or at least his family, right? And it's that time period. It's a very different time period than now, but a lot of the same things are happening today, right? So given that time period, of course, there's a lot of conversation around Black people and their experiences in this country during that time, and there's just, but not only that, there's so much else. It talks about homosexuality a little bit. We see from the perspective of good men and of bad men and of women and of people of various races and just, again, just different walks of life, just different people, and in very specific situations. And you get a decent amount of backstory for several of them. And that backstory is kind of woven into the story in a way that it's just interesting. It almost feels like, well, I guess it makes sense. It almost feels like some of them, at least, are like snippets of short stories. Like I wouldn't be surprised if George Saunders wrote a few short stories and then just tied them together and then came up with the rest of this book, right? But it was cool in that way. And George Saunders is typically or historically or predominantly a short story writer, and at least that's my understanding. And so Anyway, it was just really well done, and it was all handled with care, all handled with care in one regard, but also a lot of it was really nasty. A lot of it was vulgar, and you know, he didn't tread lightly around a lot of topics, and he wrote from some point of views or some perspectives that are horrible, and you know, they had horrible things to say, and they did not treat people nicely, and but it was still, it felt strong. It felt like a powerful message, almost especially during those times, from those perspectives. So that was really, really great. And it's also strangely funny, or like it's crass for sure, but it's also just, a lot of it is just funny. It's just silly. Like I chuckled a few times reading it, which I did not expect. Maybe that's a staple of George Saunders. Maybe he's a funny writer. I'm not sure, but it definitely was. It definitely, you know, it's not hilarious, but it was funny. It was clever, and so I appreciated that. So with all of my complaints that I had about this book, I ended up really liking this, and I would recommend this to people, with heavy disclaimers, though. I would honestly, I'd point them to that George Saunders video that I watched where he explains how to read it, and I would probably just like open the book in front of them and be like, this is weird, but this is how this is written, and you'll get used to it, sort of, if you want to. But if you want to quit the book after 30 pages, I would understand that too. It's an odd book. It's really so strange, and it put me through the ringer with my emotions just about it. But again, I maintain that I do not like this as a book, but I really, really, really liked it as a story. I think I would like to try reading more George Saunders after this, especially if he writes normally in his other works. I just wish this was written like a normal book. I don't know if that's an annoying thing to say. I don't know if I've already complained too much in this video, but I don't know why. I guess I had a lot to say about this one. I don't feel like I need to do like a full-on review of this book, especially now that I've ranted for a long time about this. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking about Lincoln and the Bardo here. It was really, really strange, but I overall, I liked it a lot. Now, the next one that I'm going to talk about, this one is going to be much quicker, because this is book 3 in a series that is very well loved here on the internet, and that series is Dungeon Crawler Carl, and the book that I read is called The Dungeon Anarchist's Cookbook. If you somehow have not heard of Dungeon Crawler Carl at this point, I'll just give you the really quick lowdown on what the series is about. Basically, it's Hunger Games, but at a large scale. It's pretty much the Earth has been essentially flattened, like all the buildings and like places that people can be in are flattened, and so everybody that was inside is pretty much dead. But if you were outside when that happened, you might be alive, and if you are alive, then you're kind of brought onto this game show. Like, these staircases open up, you walk down the staircase, and you're on this intergalactic game show in which you are forced to go level by level down into this dungeon and try to survive. There's you know, every floor of the dungeon is set up very differently, and you have to fight monsters, and it's in this genre called lit RPG. I don't know if it's a genre, but that's the style of book it is. It's a lit RPG, and it's which means like literary role-playing game, which means like the characters in the book level up almost like they are in an RPG, a role-playing game. And I never read anything like that until I read Dungeon Crawler Carl, but there's a lot of books out there that are in this same kind of style or genre of lit RPG, and it's great. This one, at least, I'm loving Dungeon Crawler Carl so far. Again, this was book 3, so there are 2 books that I read before this that I liked a lot, and this third one did not disappoint. It was really good, on par with 1 and 2, maybe better than book 2, possibly, but yeah, I don't know, maybe better than book 1. No, I think book 1 so far is still my favorite, but it was still really good. I didn't love the overall setting of like this floor of the dungeon that we were on. It was a little convoluted. It was a little confusing, but it was good otherwise. Like all the characters were great, and all the antics that they got up to were really fun. And so I was very happy with that one. But again, it's book 3 in a series. I'm not doing a full review here. Those are my quick thoughts on it. I think everybody should check out Dungeon Crawler Carl at some point. It definitely is. It's like a funny series. So if you are instantly put off by funny books, then I would say don't check it out. But if you're at all curious, check it out, because the humor might land with you. And even if it doesn't necessarily land with you, like it doesn't always land with me. Most of the time it does, but it doesn't always land with me. But there's a lot of surprisingly like deep moments too. And the lore and the universe that it's exploring is actually all really good and really well done and interesting. So yeah, I highly recommend Dungeon Crawler Carl as a whole. Book 3 held up really great. And that's all I read this month. Technically tonight I started reading Somewhere Beyond the Sea, or listening to the audiobook for Somewhere Beyond the Sea, which is book 2 in TJ Klune's series, something like the Cerulean series or something like that. But The House in the Cerulean Sea I read last month and I really loved it. And so yeah, I picked up book 2 kind of on a whim, just randomly. I needed something to read. This existed, so picked it up. Only 2 chapters in, but it's great. I'm very happy to be back in this world. And I'm also, broken record, I'm going to say this again, hopefully for the final time, because I'm like 80 pages from the end of this book, but I am still reading Andrew Watson's Harbinger of Justice, and I'm still loving Andrew Watson's Harbinger of Justice, but again, broken record, I just can't find time to sit down with a book these days. I just can't do it. I'm not succeeding at that, and it's mostly not having the time to sit down and do it, but then it's also partially that when I do find the time, it's like late at night and I'm just distracted, or I fall asleep. Like I'm just tired. So it's been a struggle to sit down with too many physical books, but it's really good, and I'm going to finish it I think this week, if I can make time for it, or over the next week. If I can manage to make that happen, which I really want to. So this, hopefully you'll be hearing from me soon. I think that this will get a full review from me this month when I finish it, because I feel like I have things to say about it. So stay tuned for that. And I'm also currently reading The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu, the Paper Menagerie and Other Stories, because this is a short story collection. This I'm reading. I'm doing like a buddy read of it. So if you're curious, you can hop over onto Fable. There's a link for that below, and you can join the buddy read. We only have a couple stories left, but you're more than welcome to join. You could pick it up at whatever short story you want, and just, you can go through our past discussions and add in your thoughts. You're more than welcome to, or you can pick up where we are and just join in as we go. Like I said, we've just a couple stories left, and if you join the Fable, it'll show you like the schedule that we're following. So yeah, feel free. If you don't want to, feel free to also not. that's fine too. And that's really it right now. That's all I'm currently reading. Just those 3 things. Although I guess I sort of started reading Far Sector. This is a comic book. I'm like nowhere in it. I sat down with it once for like 10 minutes. So I'm like 15 pages in, I think. It's neat. I think maybe I'll continue with it this month. I'm not entirely sure, but I think I'd like to. It's the only thing is, this format of comic book is pretty much why I bought it, because I was really curious about this. Normally comic books are like this big, and then they came out with this compact collection where they put them kind of the size of a normal book. And I thought that was cool. It's more portable. It's more, fits in your hand and whatever. And I thought that was neat. So I was excited for it, and I bought a few, I read one. I read The Joker in this format, and it was fine. I didn't like the comic book, but the format was fine. But this one, there's a lot more text on the page in this one, and so having the smaller size, it makes it harder to read. Like the text is just smaller. They didn't keep the font sizes the same, obviously, and scale down the images. They scaled down everything. So I'm finding it like a little hard to read. I don't know. It's not impossible. Like I have real human eyes, so I'm able to see the words on the page, but it's just like it's smaller than I want it to be. Anyway, I might continue with that this month. I'm just not 100% sure. I've heard really good things about Far Sector. We'll see. I'm definitely going to give it, a few more pages before I decide if I'm in the mood for it right now, or if I want to kick it down the road. And either way, that's fine. But yeah, we'll see what happens with that one. And then moving on to what I plan to read in the next month. well, I want to finish, like I said, I want to finish those books that I'm currently reading, all of them, including The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories. The book club will be coming to a close this month, which is bittersweet. It's been really fun to have the book club for The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories. I think I know I've enjoyed it, and there was somebody in it that commented that they were also enjoying it. Hi, Alvin, which made me feel really good. It's there's just a few of us doing it, but there's been really good discussion with every story, and I've appreciated that. So thank you so much to everybody that's joined the Buddy Read. It means a lot. It's obviously very small. It's a small community here, and it's just a small percentage of you that join that. Of course, that's expected. But I love this little community that we formed here in this little pocket of the internet, and it has been really fun to take some of that community that we have here and just read a book with them. And this is kind of a strange one to start with, maybe because it's a book of short stories, and I don't talk about short stories a ton on the channel. I haven't read a ton of short stories, but I thought it was good to have an easy pace where we just read one short story every week. It's been a lot of fun. And the stories last month, the stories that we read, they were a little weaker than the month prior, and so these stories kind of ebbed and flowed, but the conversation didn't. The conversation stayed interesting and engaging, and so that was really great. So when I look at the bookmark and I see that I'm really far through the book, I get a little like, oh man, like that's a bummer that this is gonna end. But maybe I'll do another one. I don't know that I'm gonna do one right away, because I just I'll probably just take a break from that, and I don't know what story I want to read next, or if I want to read a full-length novel, if I want to read a collection of short stories again. I don't know. So honestly, if you're interested in joining a Buddy Read with me, let me know in the comments, because maybe I will do one right away. I don't know. Maybe I'll take some time and wait to see if people request it, or maybe I'll option off some books. Maybe at some point I'll present a couple of books that people can pick between. But as of right now, that's gonna close out, and we'll see when we pick it up in the future. But again, as far as next month's books go, like the books that I plan on reading next month, the only real plan that I have, other than again finishing these books that I've already started, the books that I'm currently reading, is that I want to read Howling Dark. This I was planning on reading this month with Andrew Watson's Buddy Read, but I just wasn't in the mood for more sci-fi yet. I don't know. So I want to get to this, and I don't want to fall too far behind in his Buddy Read, because I'm having a lot of fun with that as well. But I don't know. The first book was good. I just, I'm not currently compelled to pick it up, but I'm reading a nice, light, easy book right now, and hopefully after that, I'm ready, and I want to dive in, because I would like to read more of this series, and I've heard good things about this one. So that's kind of it. That's kind of the only new book that I want to read this month. I most likely will read at least one other thing, but part of what I want to do this month is just kind of clear out my currently reading shelf on Goodreads, because there's a few books on there that I started and then I haven't touched in months, and I want to take this month to kind of try to just go back to those and really decide if I'm just done with this book or this whatever it is. Like, I have some comic books on there, I have a nonfiction book on there, I have the Iliad on there, and I just want to just open them up again, start reading a little bit more of them, and then just decide definitively to just put that off for now, like DNF that book or finish it. So we'll see. I'm going to try to do that this month and just get down to the books that I'm actually actively reading on that shelf, because there's, it's just messy. And when I go to update my books, sometimes I have to scroll through books that I haven't touched in months to get to the ones that I'm currently reading, like, legitimately. So that's what I want to do. There's a few on there. Like I said, there's the Iliad, there's Entangled Life, which is a nonfiction about fungi and mushrooms and things like that. Super cool. I'm reading a book on writing by Ursula K. Le Guin, which is also really good, and it's short. So that's one, like, I just want to finish that one. I'm enjoying that one, so I should finish that. I'm also reading Paper Girls, which I've mentioned a few times, and I haven't picked it up, but I'm loving that. So that one is one that I probably will finish Paper Girls this month, at least like the book 2 that I have. And I also have Scott Pilgrim versus the World it was a comic book before it was a movie. I love the movie, so I bought the comic books finally after years, and I don't know that I'm really loving them. Honestly, I bought this like edition of it. It's broken up into 3 like books that are about this big, but essentially there's 6 volumes of Scott Pilgrim versus the World, and I've read 2.5 of them so far, right? So I'm like almost halfway through the series, and I'm not loving it. So like things like this, I think this will probably be a DNF. Honestly, I know it's some people's like favorite series, but it's not doing it for me. I love the movie too much, but the comic books, I don't. It's one of those things where I'm reading the source material, and I'm like, oh wow, why did they ever make a movie off of this, and why was that movie so good? So I don't know if that's a popular opinion. I don't think it is, but yeah, that's on my list. So things like that, I'm gonna try to catch up. So the only new book that I'm currently planning on reading is Howling Dark by Christopher Rocchio. Now, the end of this video is just going to be some quick channel stats and some quick channel plans, like future plans. And I'm going to start by just mentioning how the channel did this month. The channel did fine this month. I had fun with the channel this month. We gained 16 subscribers, so it was slow in that regard. And I only uploaded, well, this will be the 3rd video this month, so a little bit slower because I like to do one a week, but I just had to skip one a couple weeks ago. There was just too much real life happening, and this, this is a hobby, so this falls off first. So I didn't get to make a 4th video this month, but that's okay. I still got to do my TBR culling video that I love to do, and I also did another review video, which I've been having a lot of fun making these review videos. The review videos don't do well, which is, again, it's fine, because again, I'm enjoying making them, and they're fun to make, and they're videos that I want to exist on YouTube. Like, I want other people to be making book reviews because I like watching book reviews, but I make them knowing that they don't do as well as, like tier lists and things like that. That's okay. I know that I could target specific kinds of videos and make content that is presented to a lot of people, but I've been enjoying making the reviews, so I will sprinkle that other kind of content in when I want to make it. I've made some content that has mass appeal, and I have made some content that has the opposite of that, right? My TBR culling series that I really like. It's not like a series that's gonna like get big on the internet, right? It's a very niche thing. I haven't seen other people do a video where they do what I'm doing in that series, and I think that's cool. I think that's fun. I'm getting a lot out of it, and there are a few of you who come back every month for that video, and I have a lot of fun going through the comments and talking to those, like, the regulars. Like, if you're one of those people, thank you so much for watching those videos and coming back every time I post one. They're just fun. I'm enjoying this. So it's been a slow month by YouTube's metrics, but I've had just as much fun as I have in previous months. So it's all good. I'm enjoying it. I'm going to continue doing this, of course. I think we're at the point where I can stop saying that I'm going to continue doing this because it's a given. I'm going to continue doing this. It being a slower month, there's not really a ton else to say about, in the stats portion of this video. Subscribers were low, views were low, watch time was low, click-through rate was low, but my enjoyment was high, and I appreciate all of you who have watched any of the videos that I posted this month. I'm just gonna keep going. That's where we're at. As far as next month goes, business as usual. I'm gonna probably start off the next month with a video where I check in on my goals that I set for 2025 and see how I've done. I'm not actually sure if I've been doing a good job on that. I have to sit down and look at my goals and look at the books that I've read and really figure out. I think I'm doing okay, but we'll see. I'm going to do that video because I think that'll be fun. And then I'm also going to be doing, I think, another book review. I think, but I'm not entirely sure. So, week 2 is a bit of a question mark. I really want to make more board game content. I have not done that in a while, but I've played some games recently that I think are worth talking about. So maybe one of these weeks we'll get one of those. And then there'll be just my regularly scheduled TBR culling video and a video at the end of the month where I do this. I talk about the books that I read in that month. But I also realized that I haven't asked you what you want to see. And that's silly because you're the one watching this stuff. So that's my question for this video. Is there anything that you want to know about me? Is there anything that you want to see? Otherwise, I'm just going to keep winging it, which is also fine. And I have no problem with that. So, yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, as always. I know I rambled a lot in this video about Lincoln and the Bardo, so I hope that wasn't too unbearable. I should probably also start doing that YouTube thing where I ask you to like the video if you liked it and subscribe if you have not already. But obviously, no pressure either way. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye.